they are doubling down. All the reports, the rumors we've been hearing about Brandon Ingram, Masai Ujiri's interest in bringing in the former All-Star to Toronto, even despite the fact the team's record is still in the dumpster, even with the recent success for this Raptors team, the reporters are doubling down on the Toronto Raptors' interest in Brandon Ingram. And the more chatter we hear about this, the more rationalization we are getting for the Toronto Raptors making what frankly would be a shocking trade given the current status of this Raptors organization, team, and the fact that just last season they dealt away Pascal Siakam for a lot of the reasons that would make it very confusing why the Raptors would be interested in bringing Brandon Ingram. So we're going to break down what the latest reports are saying, what the rationalization is about this for Toronto, for Masai Ujiri, for these types of trades, moves, whatever the heck this is with the New Orleans Pelicans, and frankly, why at this point, 2 days ago, I would have been mind blown if we went out and got Brandon Ingram, but why now? I see the sense. I'm not saying it's the right move, but I see the logic behind going after Brandon Ingram. So lots of stuff to break down in this video. But again, of course, if you're part of the 67% of our viewers that haven't hit the subscribe button just yet, you want to stay up to date with everything that's going on with this Toronto Raptors team as we inch closer to this year's trade deadline. Hit that subscribe button because frankly, there is a lot of just insanity, madness, reports coming out with this Toronto Raptors team. Now, a couple days ago, this sort of initially dropped. The Brandon Ingram linking to the Toronto Raptors. We have heard this for now the past couple of years. The Raptors being quietly interested. We've seen some minor report here, but then usually that would fade into the wind. It wouldn't really get brought up again. But what those types of things indicate, the same way like Masai Ujiri's always been a big fan of Miles Turner. The Masai Ujiri has his guys across the league where you're going to see reports because he'll check in a ton. He'll see if there's a trade that makes sense for the Raptors to do to acquire some of the guys that he values highly across the NBA. Well, we now have this taken up on steroids over the past couple days, specifically with Brandon Ingram. As Mark Stein revealed a couple days ago, the way the Raptors have been described to me is a team to watch. Mark Stein also in a Substack said, so this is on the Raptors show with Blake Murphy, and essentially he also said on a Substack that the Raptors are seriously interested in Brandon Ingram, and this came as a shock. This came as a surprise. A lot of Raptors fans looked at this and said, hey, why does this make any sense whatsoever? People want Cooper Flagg. They want the L's. They want the losses. Bring in a guy that puts in some very, very solid numbers when healthy. Brandon Ingram, a guy that who's this at? 22 points per game, 5.6 rebounds, 5.2 assists. Why on earth would the Raptors be interested in bringing him in, especially as an expiring free agent? Well, we now have some insights into the why, rather than just the essentially, hey, they're interested in him, and then usually a report that disappears into nothing in the future, right? We actually have reporters doubling down and breaking down the why the Toronto Raptors are interested. So basically, Jake Fisher has come out and really sunk his teeth into the situation. So as we just shown, Mark Stein reported the Raptors are showing interest in Ingram, and Jake Fisher has heard from multiple sources since then that Masai Ujiri really likes Ingram, and there's a ton of interest in Toronto adding Ingram's playmaking and ball handling abilities next to Scottie Barnes. Fisher went on to say that the Raptors have Bruce Brown's expiring contract that gets you pretty close to Brandon Ingram's $36 million, especially when you consider the Raptors have a ton of those $10 million contracts around the $10 million mark. And the Pelicans are very interested in deals where they are taking back less money and then they are sending out because they are going to be ducking the luxury tax. They are making moves to open up financial flexibility. So there's more to this quote, which we'll talk about more pieces, but essentially, Masai Ujiri is very intrigued the fact that Brandon Ingram, he's a player that is a very solid playmaker and is a guy that can really create his own shot, and thinks, around Scottie Barnes, Brandon Ingram in a Toronto Raptors uniform would just be a very nice complementary piece. Now, personally, and I went on a rant with this earlier because we've made a couple videos of the course this year with the Ingram rumors, chatter, buzz, and I've said I believe Pascal Siakam is a better fit around Scottie Barnes, and frankly, I still believe that to this day. But The argument for Ingram is he's a few years younger, like 3 years younger than Pascal Siakam. He's a guy that's a bit of a more consistent shooter, floor spacer, can create his own shot a little bit better, even though Pascal Siakam's the better defender. He's a guy that's been in more winning situations. He's won an NBA championship. And frankly, Pascal Siakam's a culture guy. He won an NBA championship with the Toronto Raptors. So it didn't make sense for me to me in my head to say, hey, let's deal away Pascal Siakam for, it wasn't 20 cents on the dollar, but it was 50 cents on the dollar, felt like, with his, pending free agency. We did get some picks. We got Ochai Agbaji. We got Bruce Brown. Like, it wasn't a absolute heist of a trade for the Indiana Pacers. Like, we did get something back, but of course the Raptors, in a vacuum, lost that trade, but it's the context, it's the money and stuff. But Masai Ujiri's brought up flexibility. So, that's the reason why they got rid of Pascal Siakam. Maybe they just want to avoid being a tax team, so the repeater tax doesn't really happen until they move forward in the future. Whatever the strategy is, it just didn't make a ton of sense to go in that route for Brandon Ingram. But I'd be a hypocrite to say that I didn't believe in this Raptors roster, that I said, hey, I want to see what this roster looks like with Immanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, Scottie Barnes, Pascal Siakam, Jakob Poeltl, then of course all the rooks, the bench that is developing. And frankly, I'd be a hypocrite to say I wouldn't want to see what this team would look like with an actual forward out there at that forward spot, a little bit more extra depth, and see what we have with some extra role players. So I don't want to come out and say that this would be a horrific move, a horrific stretch. It just boggled my mind with the Pascal Siakam stuff because, again, a lot of the positives that are said about Ingram matches Pascal, and just love, care of watching this team forever. I was more rooting for Pascal Siakam. But then this is where things get really interesting. So the Raptors' interest in Ingram is true and it's legitimate. And it's something new. The last we heard of teams being interested in Ingram was the Bucks, and that was before he injured his ankle, which really cooled his market. The Raptors don't have really any interest in competing at all this season. It's all about next year. So it makes sense given his injury that Ingram is looking for, and so it makes sense given his injury. So that is the very interesting piece of this, because I'm in the same boat, folks. Like, I want a star. I don't want this season to be wasted on like the 10th pick in this year's NBA draft. I either want to be competitive, competing and stuff after we just thrown away the start of the season. I want something solid. I want some of the back half of this draft. I want to be rewarded for watching those games out there in December, whether it's Cooper Flag, whether it's Ace Bailey, whoever the heck it is. I want the Raptors to get that maximum sort of return out there at the end of the season. But Brandon Ingram, of course, in a vacuum would hurt that. But he has been dealing with a high ankle sprain. There's no real indication in terms of when he'll be back into action. So the fact that right now his market is even worse than it would have been, entering this year's trade season because he's injured, the Raptors are probably going to be able to swoop in and get him for basically nothing. Because essentially Fisher went on to say about how teams that would be interested in Ingram, like the Sacramento Kings, the Milwaukee Bucks, they aren't as interested in him right now as a win-now piece because he's injured, because he's dealing with this high ankle sprain. So it's not going to affect winning so far in the short term, so that's a positive for the Toronto Raptors. So it means, one, the market there's nothing there for the New Orleans Pelicans to essentially get for him, and so it means we don't have to give up guys like RJ Barrett, names that are getting thrown around out there the other day. But two, it means the Raptors can swoop in and just not affect their tank, not affect the losses. I know there's a lot of people now saying, Ben, stop with the tank, the nonsense, this. It's what the Raptors want to do. I get what people are saying with the opinions, saying the right direction. Everyone can have their own opinion in terms of what the Raptors should do. The Raptors have openly said out there at press conferences, there's videos of it. I have 1,000 videos covering the quotes. Jakob Poeltl coming out and saying that this is a rebuilding year. He doesn't expect to win a ton of games. Darko Rajaković calling this year one of a rebuild about 1,000 times entering this season. That is what the Raptors want to do. It doesn't make sense to pivot on that halfway through a season when you've already tanked away the start of the year. That's what the Raptors are doing. So that we got to get that through our heads. We're losing this year. That's kind of what this squad is doing. So basically, the Raptors bring in Brandon Ingram, given his current injury situation, probably won't affect this team's tank. This team's losing. This team's in the short term. But we all know Masai Ujiri doesn't like being a bottom feeder, doesn't like being just trash as long as possible. And having Ingram out there locked in your squad for next season could be very, very intriguing. And essentially a really good point here was made because, of course, Brandon Ingram is looking to get his money. Given his injury, Ingram is looking for his next payday. For Toronto, you could bring in a former All-Star on an expiring contract in a market that hasn't ever been major players in the free agent market. It just makes a ton of sense. So, again, his stats, 22 points per game, 5.6 rebounds, 5.2 assists. I get this approach. If this is something that doesn't affect our kind of win now status, it doesn't, going to lead us to like a play-in team that's going to get knocked out in the first round by the Cavs or something random like that, I am very, very cool with that, because I don't want to go through another year tank, especially when we have a talent like Scottie Barnes, when we have talents like RJ Barrett out there on the roster, Jakob Poeltl out there in the mix. We ideally are on the upswing coming next year. I don't want multiple years of just losing. So I'm a little bit more sold on this Ingram stuff than I was a couple days ago. I can't lie. Again, I don't want to give up any assets whatsoever, like picks, any RJ Barretts, any of these types of pieces, but any of these expirings, Bruce Brown and then a Kelly, like something, Bruce Brown, Davion Mitchell. I know those are assets, they've been good, but that is something I'm a little bit more intrigued by. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. You guys are the best making this far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. Anyways, I'm signing out. Cheers.